In today's video, I want to share a story that still feels unbelievable every time I think about it. It's a story about loneliness, family, unexpected kindness, and a moment that changed my life when I least expected it. If someone had told me that the person who would help me through the darkest chapter of my life would be my stepson, I never would have believed them. 4 years, I tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother, and the perfect member of our blended family. From the outside, everything looked fine. We lived in a comfortable home, shared meals together, celebrated holidays, and smiled in family photos. But as many people know, appearances can be deceiving. Behind those smiles was a woman who felt invisible. Have you ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely alone? That was my reality. When I married my husband, I knew becoming a stepmother would come with challenges. Building trust takes time, and I never expected my stepson to immediately accept me. I respected his space and tried my best to support him without forcing a relationship. Some days felt promising, while others felt like we were strangers living under the same roof. At the same time, my marriage was slowly changing. The conversations became shorter. The laughter became less frequent. The connection that once felt strong seemed to fade little by little. I kept telling myself things would get better. I convinced myself that every family goes through difficult seasons. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The loneliness became impossible to ignore. I started spending more time by myself, trying to distract my mind from the growing emptiness I felt every day. I would sit for hours replaying old memories, wondering where everything had gone wrong. Was I expecting too much? Was I failing as a wife? Was I failing as a stepmother? Those questions followed me everywhere. Then one evening, something happened that I never saw coming. I thought I was completely alone in the house. My husband was away, and I believed my stepson was spending time with friends. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to let my guard down. I sat quietly, lost in my thoughts, reflecting on my life and the mistakes I believed I had made. That's when I heard a voice behind me. A voice that instantly made my heart stop. It was my stepson. The last person I expected to see. I quickly wiped away my tears, hoping he hadn't noticed how broken I felt. But one look at his face told me he had seen more than I realized. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. Then he said something so unexpected, so shocking, that I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about our relationship began to change. What he revealed next would force me to question everything happening inside our family. And before the night was over, I would discover a truth that had been hidden right in front of me the entire time. But I had no idea that this conversation was only the beginning of a much bigger story. I stared at him, unsure of what to say. My stepson wasn't someone who usually started emotional conversations. In fact, over the years, he had become known for keeping his feelings to himself. Most of our interactions were polite but brief. We rarely talked about anything personal. That was why his expression caught me off guard. There was something different in his eyes that night. It wasn't anger. It wasn't judgment. If anything, it looked like concern. For a moment, I wondered how much he had seen. Had he noticed the tears? Had he overheard me talking to myself? Had he been standing there longer than I realized? The questions rushed through my mind, but before I could ask any of them, he quietly sat down across from me. The silence returned. Normally, that silence would have felt uncomfortable. But this time it felt like both of us were waiting for something important to happen. Finally, he looked at me and said, "You've seemed unhappy for a long time." His words hit harder than I expected. I had spent months trying to hide my feelings from everyone around me. I smiled during family dinners. I acted normal during conversations. I convinced myself that nobody noticed how much I was struggling. Yet somehow, the one person I thought paid the least attention had noticed everything. I tried to brush it off with a small smile. "I'm fine," I told him. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded unconvincing. He didn't argue. He didn't push. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he expected that answer. Then he said something else that immediately made my stomach tighten. Sometimes people think they're hiding things better than they really are. I felt a chill run through me. The comment seemed simple, but there was something underneath it. Something that felt bigger than the conversation we were having. Before I could respond, he glanced toward the hallway and lowered his voice. It was such a strange reaction that I found myself looking in the same direction. The house was quiet. There was nobody there. At least, that's what I thought. When I turned back toward him, he seemed hesitant, as if he was debating whether he should continue. That hesitation only made me more nervous. Over the next few minutes, he began asking questions that seemed unrelated at first. Questions about how long I had been feeling isolated. Questions about whether certain things at home had seemed unusual recently. Questions about whether I trusted everyone around me as much as I thought I did. The conversation was becoming increasingly confusing. And then I started remembering small details I had ignored for months. Missed phone calls. Conversations that suddenly stopped when I entered a room. Strange tension during family gatherings. Little things that never made sense on their own. As those memories began connecting in my mind, a feeling of unease started growing inside me. And judging by the serious look on my stepson's face, he knew something that I didn't. Something he had been carrying for a long time. Something that could change the entire family forever. I wanted answers, but the more my stepson spoke, the more questions I seemed to have. Every sentence felt like a piece of a puzzle that I couldn't quite put together. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" I finally asked. He looked down for a moment before answering. "I'm not sure you're ready to hear everything." That response only increased my anxiety. For months, I had blamed myself for the distance growing inside our family. I thought maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I wasn't being patient enough, understanding enough, or strong enough. But now, for the first time, I wondered if there were things happening around me that I had never noticed. As I sat there, memories kept surfacing. There had been several occasions when my husband seemed distracted whenever certain topics came up. Family plans were often changed at the last minute without explanation. Sometimes I would walk into a room and conversations would suddenly stop. At the time, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Now I wasn't so sure. What troubled me even more was the fact that my stepson appeared to have been carrying this burden alone. His normally calm face showed signs of stress I had never noticed before. Looking back, there had been moments when he seemed like he wanted to say something but changed his mind at the last second. Maybe those moments meant more than I realized. The deeper I thought about it, the more I began to see another side of the story. While I had been struggling with loneliness and uncertainty, perhaps my stepson had been facing challenges of his own. Maybe he had been observing things from a perspective I didn't have. The realization created an unexpected connection between us. For years, we had lived under the same roof while barely understanding each other. Yet now, it felt like we were standing on the same side of a mystery that neither of us fully understood. Then his phone suddenly lit up on the table. He glanced at the screen, and the color drained from his face. Without saying a word, he locked the phone and slipped it into his pocket. But I had already noticed enough to know one thing. Whatever message had just appeared, it was connected to the secret he had been trying to tell me about. My heart started racing the moment I saw his reaction. Whatever was on that phone had clearly shaken him. A few minutes earlier, he had seemed determined to talk. Now he looked like someone who regretted even starting the conversation. "Who was that?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "No one," he replied. But the answer came too quickly. The tension in the room grew heavier. I could feel it in the silence between us. For the first time that evening, it seemed like my stepson was debating whether he should trust me completely or continue protecting whatever secret he had been carrying. Then something unexpected happened. A car pulled into the driveway. The sound immediately caught both of our attention. My stepson's eyes widened. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. Whoever had arrived was not supposed to be here yet. I moved toward the window, but he quickly stood up. "Wait," he said. The urgency in his voice stopped me. I had never heard him sound like that before. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. The atmosphere inside the house felt completely different now. What had started as an emotional family conversation was turning into something far more serious. The front door remained closed, but footsteps could be heard outside. Slow. Steady. Getting closer. My mind raced through dozens of possibilities. Was it my husband? Was it someone connected to the strange events my stepson had been hinting at? And why did he seem so nervous about whoever was approaching? I looked back at him and noticed something in his hand. A folded piece of paper. The same paper he had been keeping hidden since the conversation began. "You need to see this," he finally whispered. My stomach tightened. For months, I had felt like pieces of my life were missing. Now it seemed like some of those missing pieces were right in front of me. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The house fell completely silent. My stepson slowly unfolded the paper and looked directly at me. "I wanted to tell you sooner," he said. "But I wasn't sure who I could trust." And just as he started to hand me the document, the doorknob began to turn. The moment the doorknob moved, my stepson pulled the paper back toward himself. His reaction was instant, almost automatic, as if he had rehearsed that moment in his mind countless times. We both stared at the door. A second later, it opened. My husband stepped inside. Normally, his arrival would have brought a sense of comfort. But that night, everything felt different. The tension in the room was impossible to ignore. Even he seemed to notice it immediately. His eyes moved from me to my stepson and then to the folded paper still clutched in his hand. For a brief second, nobody spoke. Then my husband forced a smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. The question sounded normal, but something about it felt off. My stepson quickly slipped the paper into his pocket. "Yeah," he replied. The answer was short, almost guarded. What happened next caught my attention even more. My husband didn't ask any follow-up questions. He didn't seem curious about why we were sitting together so late at night. He didn't ask why the atmosphere felt so uncomfortable. Instead, he looked relieved. Relieved that whatever conversation had been happening appeared to be over. That small detail stayed with me. As the evening continued, I couldn't stop noticing things I had overlooked before. Every glance between them seemed loaded with meaning. Every pause felt intentional. It was as if an invisible conversation was happening right in front of me. The more I watched, the more confused I became. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I found myself unable to sleep. The unanswered questions kept replaying in my mind. What was on that paper? Why had my stepson been so afraid to show it to me? And why did my husband seem nervous the moment he saw it? Hours passed before I finally decided to get a glass of water. As I walked through the dark hallway, I noticed a faint light coming from downstairs. Someone was awake. Carefully, I moved closer. The voices were quiet at first, too quiet to understand. Then I recognized them. My husband. And my stepson. I froze. Neither of them knew I was there. From where I stood, I could hear only fragments of their conversation, but one sentence came through clearly enough to make my heart pound. "We can't keep this hidden much longer." The words echoed in my mind. But before I could hear anything else, a third voice suddenly joined the conversation. A voice that shouldn't have been in our house at all. And the moment I recognized who it belonged to, I realized this mystery was far bigger than I had ever imagined. I stood frozen in the hallway, barely breathing as I listened. The third voice belonged to my husband's older sister, someone who rarely visited and certainly wouldn't be in our house in the middle of the night without a reason. My mind raced. Why were they meeting in secret? And what were they hiding from me? Before I could think any further, I accidentally shifted my weight, causing a floorboard to creak beneath my feet. The conversation downstairs stopped instantly. A few seconds later, my husband called my name. There was no point hiding anymore. I slowly walked into the room. The expressions on their faces told me everything. They looked surprised, nervous, and strangely relieved all at the same time. "What is going on?" I asked. The silence that followed felt endless. Then my stepson stood up. His hands were shaking as he pulled the folded paper from his pocket. "I think she deserves to know," he said quietly. For the first time, nobody argued with him. He handed me the document. As I unfolded it, I expected to find evidence of some terrible secret, a betrayal, or something that would destroy our family. After weeks and months of feeling disconnected, my imagination had prepared me for the worst. Instead, what I saw left me speechless for a completely different reason. The document was a proposal. A detailed plan. Filled with notes, dates, ideas, and handwritten comments from my husband, my stepson, and several family members. At first, I didn't understand. Then the pieces finally came together. For months, they had been secretly organizing something for me. Not because they wanted to exclude me, because they wanted to surprise me. My husband admitted that he had noticed how isolated and unhappy I had become. My stepson confessed that he had seen my loneliness long before anyone else had. Together, they had spent months planning ways to reconnect the family, create new memories, and help me feel valued again. The strange conversations. The hidden meetings. The sudden changes in plans. Everything suddenly made sense. Tears filled my eyes as the weight of uncertainty finally lifted. But just when I thought the mystery was solved, my stepson smiled and said something unexpected. "That's not the only reason we kept it secret." Everyone exchanged nervous glances. My husband reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. I stared at it in confusion. Then he placed it in my hands. Inside was a letter addressed to me. A letter written years earlier by someone I never expected to hear from again. And in that moment, I realized the biggest surprise of all was still waiting to be revealed. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter and began to read. The handwriting was instantly familiar. It belonged to someone who had once played an important role in my life but whom I had lost contact with years earlier. As I read each line, emotions I had buried for a long time began to surface. The letter wasn't filled with shocking secrets or dramatic revelations. Instead, it contained something far more meaningful. It was a message about family, forgiveness, and the importance of never assuming people know how much they are loved. The writer spoke about missed opportunities, unspoken feelings, and how easy it is for people to drift apart when life becomes busy. But the message that stood out most was simple. The people who care about us often show it in ways we don't immediately recognize. By the time I finished reading, tears were running down my face. I looked around the room. My husband, my stepson, and the rest of the family were watching quietly. For months, I had convinced myself that I was carrying my struggles alone. I had interpreted distance as rejection and silence as indifference. But the truth was very different. My husband admitted that he had noticed my sadness but struggled to find the right way to help. My stepson shared how difficult it had been to watch me blame myself for things that weren't my fault. He explained that the reason he had finally spoken up was because he couldn't stand seeing me feel isolated any longer. In that moment, I realized something important. The person I least expected to understand me had become the person who helped me the most. Over the following weeks, our family started having more honest conversations. Instead of hiding concerns, we talked about them. Instead of making assumptions, we asked questions. The walls that had slowly formed between us began to come down. My relationship with my stepson changed the most. The awkward distance that had defined our years together was replaced with trust and respect. We didn't become perfect overnight, but we became something much stronger, a real family. Looking back, what started as a confusing and emotional chapter became one of the most important lessons of my life. Sometimes the biggest family secrets aren't harmful at all. Sometimes the real mystery is failing to see how much people care until they finally find the courage to show it. And if there's one takeaway from this true story, it's this: never underestimate the power of a simple conversation. It can heal misunderstandings, strengthen family relationships, and reveal support that was there all along. In my case, it was my stepson who helped me see that, and it's a lesson I'll never forget.